That's it. We had got 9 people saying that they were definitely joining us, and then 29 people saying they were interested. So no idea. Yes, Samantha, tech is a pain when it doesn't. But yeah, we've had to start up about 15 minutes early so that we can play with this system and see how the damn thing flaming works.
Chris, have you realised you're the odd one out?
Sorry?
Have you realised you're the odd one out?
I'm not called John, no.
You're the odd one out because you haven't got a beard.
Oh, I haven't got a beard, no. But at least I've got the sort of grey, white coloured hair.
Oh, yeah.
Mine is very badgerish.
It's the stripes of wisdom.
Yeah.
I've just put a post up on my Substack platform, which is where I'm publishing all my articles to these days, called Should We Reclaim the Crone? Because no doubt you two have seen these posts all over the place of this sort of spiritual factions sort of saying, we should reclaim the crone. And I've sort of sat there for a while thinking, reclaim her from what? And they're sort of going on, oh no, the crone is the wise woman, is the and you get quite a lot of people saying, well, the alternative meaning of crone is that the word crone comes from the word crown. And I'm thinking, oh no, it doesn't. It most definitely doesn't. So I've just done quite a nice, I think, 1,500 word article. Questioning, should we reclaim the crone?
My wife's actually halfway through a 12-month course with Sullivan-Blakeney called Haggitude.
Yes. Yeah.
She's doing that. So she has people, they have guest speakers in, people like Caroline Hillier, etc., coming in, etc.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite. She's really enjoying it. And a number of years ago, Emma Esther-Law, Bobcat, brought out a book called Kissing the Hag.
Yeah.
And Bobcat, being Bobcat, phoned me up and said, I'm having a book launch. Could you come and tell me a story for it? So I said, yes, of course. And then she said, and now you've signed up, all the performers are goddesses, so you've got to drag up.
Yeah, I mean,
with long purple hair and a purple skirt.
Yeah, I can understand the concept of embracing the crone and the hag, but not the concept of reclaiming the crone as your identity.
Yeah.
Because apart from 20th century, there is no evidence of the crone ever having had a positive persona. Not until you get to Robert Graves. And it all started from him. And if you look at what's his name? I can picture him. Historian, Bristol University. Yeah.
No, you mean.
Yeah. He actually views it very much that Robert Graves actually created this idea of the crone having a positive.
Yeah, you're thinking of Ronald Hutton, Professor Hutton. Yeah. I mean, the origins of this maiden mother crone is the White Goddess, which was, you're right, Robert Graves, and it was a romantic fiction.
Yes.
Of an artist who's lost his muse, and the muse, of course, turns out to be, a very young woman.
Yeah.
So you know, really, it's denigrating the idea of a crone, if anything.
Yeah.
Concept.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll have to go and have a nose on Substack, and you
I think
can
my view of that is as a storyteller, I can find you mythological and folklorist crone figures, such as the Norns, the Fates, Baba Yaga, etc.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily positive in terms of how our culture would view those figures today.
Yeah.
But they could well be viewed positively from a much more challenging period, where their role is to challenge and force you into growth.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. As I say, that's that side of it. So that is embracing that aspect.
Yeah.
And including that aspect within your life and the way you live.
Yeah.
That I can understand. But reclaiming it as a whole.
Yeah.
You know, walking out into the world and announcing, hello, I'm a crone.
In part, perhaps that's again going back into the Graves' romantic vision of what cronehood is, and it's a created image that we're then seeking to reclaim. But it's a created image. How do you reclaim it?
Yes, that's the final point I make in this article. To be able to reclaim something, it has to have been there in the first place for you to reclaim it. But as I said, my grandmother was a village wise woman. I've taken on her mantle, minus the village, which is long since gone. But if you'd have called my grandmother a crone, she'd have lamped you one.
Yeah,
she really would have.
my image of a crone being an absolute crone is Granny Weatherwax.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, I'll send you the
and like your mother, you know what she'd have done to you if you told her she was a crone.
Yeah. I'll have to send you to the link to my Substack. All the articles, all the articles on there are free. So long as when you land on this, when you land on the subscribe page, so long as you make sure it's clicked to none free. Eventually I will move all the paid stuff from the website over to the Substack as well. So what time are we on now? We're on 7 minutes past. Right, so either everybody else that is supposed to be joining us is rather late. I did actually have somebody PM me and ask for the link. And that lady hasn't appeared as yet. But I don't want to keep Samantha waiting too long and listening to us chat about various different aspects of how we see our relationship with the world. So I'd already put the first question that we'd already had up, which was a comment from James Lothian, saying it would be good to discuss the history of animism and how far back it goes.
I think there's two answers to that, really. There's the answer of how far back does the concept of what we now call animism go.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of historical context of who first came up with the term animism.
Yes.
Much later. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that was a really nice gentleman by the name of Edward Burnett Tyler, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who decided that this term he'd coined of animism actually represented a primitive belief of cultures that didn't quite really understand the concept of anything.
Yes, very much looking down on them as less evolved.
Yeah. Very much how the colonialists sort of went about it when they went out into the big world and came across indigenous tribes, and had to convert them all to Christianity and take away their practices and whatever, because they were basic people. You know, they needed to be educated, and thanks to them, we lost a lot of indigenous cultures.
Yeah, according to Tyler, animism characterizes tribes very low in the scale of humanity, and thence ascends deeply modified in its transmission, but from first to live, preserving an unbroken continuity into the midst of high modern culture. So it's very much a put down. It's, you know, he's describing, I think, the noble savage was what he termed.
Yes, very much so. Right, hi Susie. I've seen your comment there. So we've got 6 people watching now, according to my little number counter at the top. So yes, if people who are watching can just say hi in the comments so that we know who you are. Yes, so very much. I also think that animism goes back to almost as old as there have been people. Certainly, once we started questioning who we were and what the meaning of things were.
Yeah, I mean, the earliest reference we have is rock art, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And I think the thing about the colonial put down from the late Victorian era is something that continues today.
Yes.
There was a program on last week, Bettany Hughes, looking at archaeological finds in Turkey, and she was able to say that the recent exciting discoveries for historians and archaeologists pushed back the time when mankind invented religion to 11,500 years ago. And I'm like, yeah. What about before man arrived in Turkey and started building there? You know, if you go back to the Australian Aboriginal dream time, which is 100,000 years at least, kind of thing. If you go back to some of the things going on in other parts of the world than Europe, hundreds of thousands of years ago, you know, but there is still this attitude that in Europe, we define religion started when we invented it somewhere in our area, and Turkey will count as Europe for that. Thank you very much. You know, and it's like, so I think that attitude remains. So animism as a place for anthropological interest and research is probably fairly recent. Animism as an ontology, an actual viewpoint on how the world was and existed, how long has mankind been around? And I use the phrase mankind in inverted commas.
I quite like one of Terence McKenna's views on when mankind went from developing the more advanced brain capacity to actually start questioning spiritual aspects of life, which he puts down to them picking psychedelic mushrooms. And he called it the stoned ape theory, which a lot of scientists have taken the mickey out of. Hello, Helena. I've just noticed your comment. Yes, because there is evidence that at a certain stage, Homo sapiens brains suddenly did this massive developmental stage. And it wasn't something that was over a long period of time. It was sort of like, you know, at one point our brains were about that big, and then suddenly within a few decades they were that big. And they've never been able to find any plausible reason for that occurring. So I think the stoned ape theory is as good as any other for that one. But certainly people that are sort of into the psychedelics will talk about the exceptional experience they have connecting with. You know, if you listen to Paul Stamets, who's one of the foremost specialists in the mycelium world, he will tell you when he did psychedelic mushrooms that the mushrooms actually spoke to him, and the mushrooms taught him about the mycelium world. I mean, as my grandmother always used to teach me right from when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, there are more things on the face of this earth than the eye can see and the ear can hear.
Yeah.
You know, and I witnessed her from when I was a very young child. She talked to everything. Yeah, whether it be the grass or the trees or animals or even the stones and the rocks. She spent most of her life in the garden muttering at stuff.
I mean, let's be honest. There's we know from science that there are species out there that have different visual abilities and auditory abilities, audible abilities than us. They hear more, they see more, and yet we, within the fascism of humanity, determine that if we can't see it or hear it, it doesn't exist. You know.
Yeah.
And in terms of going back to the development of the Homo sapien brain, I mean, there is evidence, archaeological evidence, of Neanderthal man actually having ritual behaviors, and ritual behaviors suggest some form of religious aspect or spiritual aspect. And with a spiritual aspect, well, it starts with animism.
Yeah, they have recently made discoveries. I can't remember in which area of the world it was, in relation to the Neanderthals. That I think it was within the rock art, and it indicates a spiritual belief and connection. So the Neanderthals, yes, they were as advanced as us.
I think part of the problem we have is that we have in Western society we have what you would call a human-centric viewpoint.
Yes,
there's this idea, and I mean some of it comes from an atheist religion, from Christianity particularly, that God created man in His own image, and so therefore, and then created everything else for man, including sadly woman. But it was I mean it was only fairly recently that the Christian Church agreed that women had a soul.
Yeah,
I mean that's how extreme it was, and that caused this fissure between human people and other than human people. Which still exists in tribal culture. That everything is perceived as alive, both what we would call animate and inanimate. That they don't have this concept of inanimate. They don't believe necessarily that everything's alive, but it is potentially alive. And with experience, we can experience that life, but we can't look at it in a sort of Walt Disney way of putting human values onto it.
No,
because other life forms are going to have different values to us and a different form of intelligence to us.
And they're going to communicate in very, very different ways.
Look at the stuff around the Wood Wide Web and around the how the root systems within forests actually move nutrients and waters and things around to support each other. You actually have parent trees that manage the process.
Yes.
That's a very different level of cooperation, of connection, as opposed to disconnection, of being a part of rather than apart from, but also a different way of operating intelligently to be able to move things between different organisms to meet the needs of the organism as a whole. Which again, with animism, you have a forest, you have tree, you have oak, spirit oak, but you have also each individual oak tree has spirit as well. It's that recognizing that the wider issue of spirits and individual spirits within a collective whole that has spirit.
Yeah, I've always said that our inability to understand how other organisms communicate with each other says way more about our lack of understanding than it does about their ability to communicate.
Yeah,
we just don't listen. Right, hello, we've got Louise as well. Hi, Louise. Right, so I think we've perhaps not so much killed the history of animism, but let's...
Can I just add one point to the history of animism, if you like,
Yeah,
and that is in terms of how far back does it go? It's been around for a hell of a lot longer than other religions have been around than animism. In fact, it goes back multiple times for how long we've had non-animistic religions around.
Yeah, very much so. Right, so let's see what question we can lead that one on to. I think that the third question that we had in, which is from Rebecca Lowe, how does animism relate to modern day metaphysics? So the idea of energy between atoms connecting everything together. Could there
metaphysics and quantum physics, I think, as well goes in there.
Yeah. Could there be a scientific basis for animism?
Or to reverse that, could there be an animistic basis to science?
Science, yes. I think very much so with that, especially the one that the scientists are still trying to figure out with the atoms of certain types. You can move them one side of the world, one the other side, and what you apply to one on one side of the world, the one on the other side of the world immediately responds to.
They're still connected.
That's still connected. And it's got scientists scratching their heads something rotten. So like, how do they do this? How do they know? And that to me is one of the strongest pieces of evidence for science to actually recognize that the life force, whatever you want to call it, that animates things, does so instantaneously.
I've got a piece here I could read which might answer that question to some extent. Biology tells us that a tree is a living entity. Ecology tells us that a tree is part of a greater ecology that includes non-living things. Animism tells us that trees are people and that our relationship to them is important, i.e. coexistence. Animism rejects Cartesian dualism, mind and body as separate. The animist self identifies with the world, feeling at once within and apart from it, so that the two glide ceaselessly in and out of each other in a sealed circuit. If you take life down to its basic form, it consists of basic chemicals.
Yeah.
We exist because of basic chemicals. Do those chemicals have life in themselves?
Yeah.
That's the big question. But then, an animist would argue that they do.
Yeah.
And that the attraction to each other forms us.
Yes.
So, we get beyond this idea of animate and inanimate and see everything potentially animated.
Yeah, because everything breaks down to these very, very basic atoms, molecules.
Yeah, all life on this planet is carbon based.
Yeah,
and there is only so much carbon in, to go around.
Yeah,
which kind of touches onto one of the other questions we've had, which I'm sure we'll get onto later.
Yeah,
about what happens after you die. You know, these sort of big questions that always come up in spiritual matters.
So yeah, very much so. So if going back to the atoms being able to communicate across vast spaces instantaneously, if everything on this planet breaks down to the atoms, the molecules, the quarks, whichever one goes down to the smallest one they've decided exists at the moment, if they are all communicating with each other, and again, when you talk about animism, you get people saying, oh, so if you talk to a rock, and I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm not expecting the rock to sit there and go, well, hi, yeah, actually. It goes back to our lack of understanding as to how they communicate. But even the rocks break down into the atoms and the molecules. And if a certain atom communicates by putting out an electrical signal or a chemical signal, then that is its form of communication.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if that electrical signal or the chemical signal that it puts out then commands a response from the things that come into contact with it, then that is the communication going back the other way. So in that respect, yes, they are communicating. We just don't understand it.
This thing that gets thrown about, if you want to sit down and have a conversation with a rock, what does the rock say, or the tree say, or the plant say? It's just intellectual laziness. Yeah. It's the same way that if I sit down with a guy across the road who is Urdu speaking and speaks no English, and I speak, well, actually, I shouldn't choose Urdu. I do speak a little bit of it, but on the whole, say I speak no Urdu, we will still be able to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Even though we can't speak the same language, you find ways of communicating. My cat and I can communicate with each other, not brilliantly, not perfectly, but there are areas where we can communicate with each other. And it's the same thing. You have to be prepared to accept that you can communicate without the person or the individual or the entity that you're communicating with doing so in English.
Yes.
A tree is likely to be more patient with me than I am with the tree.
Yeah.
But if you sit there and you connect, I mean, we all know forest bathing, and it's now being shown scientifically how forest bathing can promote well-being in humans. Well, what if you actually went there and didn't just stand there for 20 minutes, but actually sat there and tried to communicate and connect with and be open to the forest communicating with you and what it's actually communicating that's helping you to feel better. And we just have to be able to communicate in different ways and be open to that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And there's a whole industry now based on, a commercial industry based on a new age belief, really, which has origins probably way back. And it's about things like this.
Yeah.
It's about a quartz crystal having some sort of healing ability.
Yeah.
Being able to communicate. And yet we don't, we don't as pagans question that. We accept that. So why do people have a problem accepting animism? When it, when you read your tarot cards.
Yeah.
On the one level, you could say tarot cards are pieces of paper with images printed on them. To a lot of people that read tarot, they are something beyond that.
Yes.
They have some sort of ability. or act as a tool for you to be able to predict future events.
Yeah.
You know,
see, I read tarot, and very often the person I've been reading for has sort of gone, well, how did you know that? And I'm like, I don't know how I knew that. I looked at this card, and it's almost like instantaneous. Very, very often when I'm doing readings, something will come out of my mouth. It hasn't even gone through my brain.
Yeah.
And I'm sat there as much as the person I'm reading for, saying, where the hell did that come from?
There are more than 6 senses.
Yeah.
And intuition is a sense.
Yeah.
Seeing patterns is a sense. Picking up the chemical messages from the person sitting opposite you is a sense.
Yeah. It's very much and they're sort of saying, well, how do the cards come out? I only pick these cards at random, so how do they come out with the meaning for what I wanted to ask? And I sort of say that there are so many different explanations, and none of them are any better than any other. So I always go with the one that there's an invisible little group of fairies in the pack of cards, and they just hand you the right card that you need for your situation.
Little creatures.
Yeah, it's as good an explanation as any other.
Some 40 odd years ago, I worked in a adolescent unit in another part of the Midlands. I'd been on holiday. I hadn't actually been on duty for 2 weeks, and I walked in to go on shift. And as soon as I opened the front door, I felt it, and I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
I went straight to the main lounge where everyone was, just looked in, pointed to one lad, pulled him out.
Yeah.
Right? How are you? Fine. What happened the weekend? Everything was fine. What went wrong between you and your sister? And he's like, how did you know? I said, the way you said fine. But it's just, you can feel the energy sometimes. And somebody I worked with many years later said to me, it's called craft knowledge. And it's got all your knowledge, all your experience, all those senses that you have come together to give you knowledge that technically you shouldn't be able to have. And it seems like intuition or a flash of whatever, but actually it's craft knowledge. All those ways that we communicate, all our senses come together and we learn to use them. And animism, I think, helps with that ability to use and be open to all those different senses that we have.
Yeah.
So could there be a scientific basis for animism? I think I would respond by saying that the fairly recent worldview that is called science is beginning to catch up with what animism has known for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
I mean, I jotted down a few terms in relation to this question, that if people want to explore around these terms, there's a lot of information as far as the science. I mean, the one that most people are probably most famous about is the GAIA theory of James Lovelock, actually recognizing that the world is an animate place and it's all connected, and the whole of the earth is alive. From that, you've had a couple of off splits. One is now called Earth Systems Science. Basically, because it's more or less the same as Gaia theory. But Gaia having been the name of a Greek goddess, scientists can't possibly have anything as a scientific theory named after a Greek goddess. So Earth System Science is another good one. And deep ecology is another term that if people Google around and explore, If you're on YouTube, look for videos done by a bloke called Stephen Harding, and he actually is a lecturer at Schumacher College in Devon, I think it is. And Schumacher run an awful lot of science courses based around animism. And trying to educate people to get over this enlightenment that we went through that was anything but an enlightenment. And the whole of this separation that we've got in modern science, where modern science has separated humans out from non-human animals, from plants, from whatever. And the chap that we get the term Cartesian dualism from, René Descartes, who was an absolute, in my mind, he was an absolute evil bastard, excuse my language. Again, he was very high up in the church, which is where his science view got traction from. But there is one tale of him instructing his assistants doing experiments on animals without any anaesthetic, telling them to ignore the screams of the animals because they were only creakings of a machine. And I'm thinking that is not, that's not a Christian. I seriously hope that René Descartes went to hell. If his view of what he believed in heaven and hell really did exist, I really hope he went to hell for that one.
I hope he's reincarnated as a lab specimen.
Yes, that would be a good one. Yeah, a beagle in the laboratory that's just outside York. Yeah. But again, if going back to taking our modern term of animism back, before this Enlightenment and René Descartes, so I'm just half keeping my eye on the comments. I'll come back to your comment in a minute, Louise. Yeah, before the Enlightenment, if you go back and you look at names like Plato and Goethe, spelled Geothe.
Oh yeah.
They were scientists before science was called science, but they were also animists. And they did an awful lot of exploring around relationships, about how the world worked. So there are another couple of names that, right, so let me keep my eye on these comments. So we've got, let me just show Louise's comment. So I got given a piece of bluestone one winter solstice. It wanted to go to Stonehenge. I only knew it because I knew I had to take it, but it had a level of urgency in me, so I took it. Yeah, that
and then
is.
There's a follow-up comments to that as well, Chris.
Right. Okay.
Louise.
Yeah. So when there, I held it against one of the bluestones. It was a very cold winter. At one point, I moved one of my fingers, and where I moved it to was boiling hot. Yes.
That's like.
That is. Yeah, that's going back to my grands saying there are more things on this earth than the eye can see and the ear can hear, or that we can work out why. I think a lot of the time it's down to our abilities to suspend disbelief and to accept that,
and to reopen belief.
Yes.
It's interesting. When I first started to look into animism, and was sort of doing searches online, and one of the things that came up was child psychology. And it was actually, if a child is still expressing animist concepts after a certain age, that they are not developing properly and that they need special attention. And it's interesting that as children, we are naturally animists.
Yes.
And in Western culture, we're actually trained out of being animists,
Yeah.
And it's anarchists then, but, maybe animism is a form of anarchy in the modern world. But, as a child, we talk to our teddy bear or a cuddly toy. We believe in Father Christmas. We have friends that people later tell us are imaginary.
Yeah.
We have all these qualities naturally from birth.
Yeah.
And then we're basically told, oh no, that's not true. Now you're grown up, you can't believe that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's I experienced this with my own son when he was young. He ran up to me and he said, the trees just talk to me. And I said, oh, that's great, And then his mother chastised me for supporting him in that.
Yeah.
But you mustn't let him believe that sort of thing. And I said, well, I didn't. I just, assured him that it was okay.
Yeah.
But we have a society that, says that's wrong.
Yeah.
And that we must educate it out of people,
Yeah.
Is that phrase that Chris used earlier about the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment was actually the application of blinkers.
Yes.
They closed our vision. They didn't enlighten, they darkened it, they impoverished us.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that thing about suspending disbelief or being open to belief. A number of years back, I was up in the Lake District, and I went up to Long Meg for the first time I'd been there. In fact, the only time I've been there. And I strode straight across the stone circle, straight up to Long Meg, and said, so you're Long Meg. And I literally felt a crack across my face.
Yeah.
Literally felt it. Stunned me. Went back out the circle, asked permission to come in. And it is this thing that if you don't believe, if your eyes are shut, if your ears are shut, if your senses are shut, like being able to feel the hot and the cold on the stone there, Louise, you won't feel anything. You won't see anything. You won't hear anything. But if you're open to it, then there are always opportunities for conversation at some level, for communication at some level. It's being open to it. And once you're open to it, also do it with respect, because if you know better, you'll be shown better, Yeah.
Yeah. I had a similar one I don't think it was a stone circle so much. There wasn't enough of the stones left to form a circle. And I've been trying to find this site ever since. I'm beginning to wonder whether the site did actually exist. Derbyshire, not far outside the village of Yulgreve, heading in the direction of, no, it wasn't Arborough, because these were still upright. But heading in the direction of Robin Hood Stride, which is where we were heading to. And these stones are not marked on any map. They weren't then. And I walked up to one of the stones and said hello to it and put my hand on it. And it is the first time I've had an electric shock off a stone.
Yeah.
And it literally was. It was sort of like, whoa. Yeah, it was like, ouch. That was... my thinking on that is that energy had been building up in that stone for some time, perhaps waiting for somebody to communicate with it. And I walked up, said hello, put my hand gently on it, and it just discharged everything it had been saving up for a long time. Right, we've got a comment as well from Faith.
I'm just going to put a little light on. I'm getting dark here. I'm vanishing.
Yes, you're disappearing into the depths of the gloom there, John. So we'll wait for John to return. We'll wait for
It gives
John
me a chance to stretch my back as well.
Right. Right, so John has seen the light. The other John's just gone to stretch his back a minute because he's got a very stiff back at the moment.
That's me as well.
Like you. Yeah, well, the other John's got a stiff back as well.
Right.
So yeah, Faith saying as she's returned to her true self, she's found that she's been an animist all along. She's a registered nurse and uses her craft knowledge to be intuitive with her patients. Very much how you were saying, John. About sometimes just knowing. Yeah. And sometimes you can't even put your finger on how you know. No. I've done that ever since I was a child. It used to get me into so much trouble with all the adults. Because you'd have the adults.
It was actually a nurse consultant that gave me the phrase craft knowledge.
Yeah. I'd perhaps be in a situation as a child where adults were having a conversation about something and I'd pipe up and say something which was obviously very relevant. And they'd all round on me sort of going, how did you know? You're not supposed to know about this. And I'm sort of like, I don't know. So yes, it's a very useful skill and capability to be able to get back in touch with and get the ability back to be able to use it. I also find if you start to question too much about how you know something and why you know it and how it works, is that you suddenly start to lose it. It's almost like the other world is saying to the other realms are saying to you, just accept it. Don't question it.
Yeah, Faith is RN registered nurse, I take it. Yeah. I mean, I've known a lot of nurses or people working in care and professions who, rely on instinct. That they can do all the normal things like taking blood pressure and temperature and that, but sometimes their instinct tells them what the problem is with the patient, and they can sense it. And this comes from experience, practice, and also wanting an empathetic response, actually wanting to help, and going beyond the sort of materialism. So it is a form of animism in a way, in the sense that you're trying to understand that other person. You're trying to understand what's going on in their body, and so you're almost, it's almost like the shaman doing the healing, by going into the microcosmic world of the other person and discovering the virus, whatever that's in them, and doing battle with it. So there's definitely a link between health and nursing and that medicine generally. And of course you see this there's another area of animism. I think it's called viridology, which is very strong within herbalists, that they believe, that the plant spirit must be talked to before the plant is taken and made into the herbal medicine. So you have, and this is rising up as well within forms of medicine. That there are forms of medicine which are animistic in nature.
And it's developing.
Because of course the illness. Well, the illness itself has spirit.
Yes. I'm doing battle with one myself at the moment. A nice sort of bacteria that's another alien being that's got into me, and I'm doing battle with it. I mean, it's like we can't live in the same body.
Yes, but, it's developing the other animistic trait of been developing other ways of communication.
Yeah.
And just accepting other ways of communication. And perhaps not sitting there going, well, how did I know that? Why does that work? Etc. It just does.
Yeah.
It just does.
I love Faith's statement there. I find I've been an animist all along. Yes, that's the reality of it. You know, we're trained out of being animists, but we still are.
Yeah.
You know, our education tells us that that's wrong, or that's primitive. I mean, I can remember, you know, I mean, I'm getting on a bit now, but my religious education at school was purely Christianity.
Yeah.
Didn't touch on any other religions from anywhere in the world, you know, because, well, it was a Christian who was teaching us, you know, he wasn't going to tell us about other alternatives.
But there are still words in our language that go back to animist, the animism. Words like genius. The word genius, you can, as you would apply it to perhaps genius loci, the spirit of place. That word genius goes way back before most of our modern language. Right, so if we move on to the last question we had in before, which was Piers Gentry, who is basically saying, I had to abbreviate this to get it in, but the gist of it was, when we pass over, do we come back as something else? A stone, a tree, an animal, or always come back in human form? And do we go somewhere in the meantime for a time, perhaps like return to a collective energy? I think that is one of the beauties of animism, is that you can apply the animistic concept to whatever belief system you find makes sense for you. So you get Christian animists, you get Hindu animists, you get Buddhist animists, you get animists.
I term myself as a BioRegional animist, and it's basically every bioregion is different. You know, if you're you know, you're living somewhere, it's dependent on the weather, the subsoil, the plants that grow, the trees that grow, weather patterns, all of this. Actually, if you look at belief systems around the world, there are varied, even if they are animist in nature, they are varied because of the differences of those bioregions.
Yes.
And, you know, part of the interaction of that is that you're eating of other life forms from your bioregion. And so, you know, this old term, you are what you eat.
Yes.
You know? And to me, it's very important to, you know, even if it's just the tip of a nettle, which, you know, is great this time of year, there's plenty of them growing. But to add the tip of a nettle to my stir fry, you know, and you know, I'm taking from that life form, and I'm asking question, and there's an interaction between me and that food that I'm eating that has come from a living being. And so you're interacting with nature all the time where you live. You know, you're subject to the environment where you live. And so you do get variations with questions like this about what happens to us after we die, basically, is what it's talking about. You know, it's asking. But you do see within animist tribal cultures that there's a degree of commonality, that you become all the other things that live after you. You know, what came through to me in a sort of prophetic way was you are everything that ever was, and you will be everything that ever is.
Yes.
And this fits in perfectly with the science of what's known as the carbon sink. That all life consists of carbon-based matter in its form. And when that form ends, it goes back to that carbon base, and then all life that comes afterwards comes out of that. So, I mean, to me, and it's just personal to me, this is my one life in this form, but there may be bits of me in the future in other life forms, whether they're human or not. You know, there may be other life forms, you know, I mean, you can take your pick what you'd like to be, I suppose.
Yeah.
Future life, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, you may be in so many different things. And this, of course, fits together with this whole idea of, you know, like you were saying about the Gaia hypothesis, that we're all interactive beings. We think of ourselves as separate individuals, but we are part of a complete whole.
Yes.
And we go back to being part of that complete whole all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a continuum. But that's, you know, the problem with Pierce's question there is that it leads to personal belief being expressed. And there are variants.
Yeah. If you go back to what we have now labelled as Celtic, not that the people that were about at the time would have understood that term or even applied it to themselves. It is a term I use basically because it's the term that if you use any other term, people don't understand what the hell you're on about. But if you use the term Celtic, then immediately it draws them to what you're talking about. But our ancestors from that time, especially if you're looking at the tribes that lived in what is now Wales, they classed who was related to them, which other tribe was related to them, by the geology of the rock on which they stood. So if you go back far enough in the Welsh history, there is an area sort of covering now like the Lake District and over into Lancashire and almost sort of into Yorkshire, which was known as the Old North. And it was the Old North of Wales. And they classed the people living in the Old North as their relatives because the geology of the rock was the same as the geology of the rock where they lived. Whereas people that lived in South Wales weren't relatives. You've got totally different. And I've attempted to write an article several times on this, but I need to get it clearer in my own head. And I also need to evidence what I'm trying to say. And I term it as the land beneath my feet. And I say, this is what makes the Welsh Welsh. It's what makes the Cornish Cornish. And if you look at the geology of the British Isles, you can see why our culture and our folklore and our histories and everything changes so frequently as you go up and down and across the country, and why the culture of the people is so different. And especially in places where the geology changes very quickly. You know, so in the Peak District or in Cumbria, you know, the people that live in one valley have got a totally different culture to the people that live the next valley across from them. And if you look at it, the geology of the two valleys are totally different to each other. And I'm saying it, you know, But as I say, I need to do a lot more research, and I need to do a lot more evidencing of this. It's probably going to take me years to sort of be able to put into writing what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned folklore, because I think that's very important in the connection with animism. Because if you study the folklore of the region where you live, you will find animism within the folklore.
Yeah,
gives you a link back to a deeper understanding of the land where you live, as you say, the Jewish loci. I moved from North Kent, London, and then North Kent, which was the sort of chalk downlands, of the Weald of Kent. That was where I first started to connect with the landscape, other than human beings.
Yeah.
And now I live in the Fenlands.
Yeah.
And the clue to actually understanding the Fenlands of East Anglia was the local folklore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is full of animism and it helped me to actually make that connection to the land where I'm living.
Yeah.
Which to me is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Someone asked me what the difference, between, what animism meant to me, and I actually said that it was like suddenly my world went from black and white to full technicolor.
Yeah.
That suddenly my life was completely enriched.
Yeah.
I was part of a living planet rather than,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the sort of mental illness and depression that we see, particularly in our culture, in our Western culture, is due to this lack of understanding the life around us.
A total disconnection.
As an animal, you are never alone. You're living in you could lay in a woodland and there are creatures that are observing you and interacting with you all around. So you're never alone.
No. No.
And that's the difference, I think.
Yeah. So I think possibly we've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes now, or more or less. We only had the 3 questions coming before.
And the answer to Piers' question, really, from our conversation, I think the last 20 minutes is yes. It's absolutely around what you believe.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. Or your culture or your group or your tribe or whatever. So yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, one example you could give is the Australian Aborigines. The young teenagers, as their rite of passage, are sent out into the bush, and they're told, that hill over there is your great grandfather or your grandfather. And so to them, their ancestors are part of the landscape. And plus, just mention on this, I've been doing a lot of research into pre-Wiccan witchcraft.
Yeah.
And what you come across again and again is this connection to the fae, to the good folk.
Yeah.
And that there is some sort of interaction between the man or woman, usually a woman, who becomes known as a witch, and her connection to the fae folk, to the fairy folk. And there is a lot of stuff that's been written about how the fae could actually be dead people, that they could be the spirits of people who have died, inhabiting the landscape. So it may be that with Celtic and, with the Alpha in Germanic culture, that we have evidence here of a belief system before modern religions, that you become part of the fae folk, that you become part of spirit folk that inhabit the land.
Yeah. You see, I very much feel that there are so many different layers within this world. that we cannot see and hear across the barriers between them.
Yeah.
And hence this is where you come into beliefs around Samhain and Beltane, about the veil becoming thinner. So these separations between the different levels, and I don't want to do up and down, because that is then tying into the Christian indoctrination about heaven being up there and hell being down there. It's all around us. It's almost like when you put your hand out like that, you are probably putting your hand through however many different realms.
Yeah.
And you've probably got half a dozen fae folk jumping out the way, going, "Hey, do you mind where you're poking your fingers?" So very much the other worlds are all around us.
Yeah.
And they are part.
And in terms of the veils being thinner at Samhain at Beltane, it's a nice invention.
Yeah.
The veils are only as thick or as thin as you believe them to be.
Yeah.
At any point in time.
Yeah. When I was a child, that used to be virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
The veils.
Yeah.
I can remember once frightening the life out of my teachers at school, because if I got bored at school, I'd be eyes wide open, just staring. I'd gone. And because this one occasion, the teacher just couldn't get me back. Just really couldn't get me back. She got this comatose child in front of her. And eventually, with the insistence of her calling my name, the people I was sat with used to communicate by what we would call telepathy. You didn't actually have to open your mouth to speak, to talk. And I can very firmly remember them saying to me, you need to go, you're being called. And I was like, I don't want to go. And I went, well, no, that's fine. The minute I said, I'm going to have to go, because the teacher was going, Christine, I'm going to have to go. And that was it. I was back.
Yeah.
The teacher was not too pleased with me. So yes, I had quite a reputation of being a very strange child. And I'm happy to say I don't think I've outgrown it. I'm still a very strange child.
I think it would probably be true to say that all three of us, and I've only just met you, John, but all three of us were probably those children who kept asking why and how all the time and weren't happy with the answers we got. We could be described as the stroppy ones that have come through it all and have developed our own system, our own way of living.
Yes.
And have discovered something that's very ancient in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So of any has anybody got any further points they want to raise, or any questions that this discussion has thrown up for them? Or we do have a slight delay in responses reaching us, so give it a couple of seconds for would people like us to do this again at a future date? Maybe not purely around animism, but maybe around a different concept within. Just basically, has it been useful? Would people like us to do it again? And is there any more questions from tonight's discussion?
I think there's something I would add on here that might sort of draw other people into it. There's a lot of interest in what's known as shamanism.
Yes.
And it was in exploring shamanism that I first really came across animism as a concept.
Yeah.
Because and what you realise is that what we call the shaman, which it only really existed in Siberia as a named occupation, but was taken as a universal phenomenon. Because it was spotted that there was similar people or behaviours going on all over the world. That only exists within an animist culture. If you take shamanism out of that animist culture, you're just really dealing with a form of psychology.
Yeah.
So, and this whole idea of, I prefer the term shamanry. That if you take as an example, if you believe that all life has a soul, has a spirit, then and you need to eat it, then you need an intermediary. You need a shaman-like figure to act as the intermediary to say, I will look after the soul of that spirit and give it back to the great spirit of that creature. So that there is continuity. And it's interesting that within folklore we still have the idea of the corn dolly. And songs about folk songs about the little man with the beard makes the beer. and so there's evidence there of animism in medieval times at least.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
It has never really
I think you don't have to be a shaman or follower of shamanism in whatever name is given to it in cultures around the world to be an animist. But yes, you have to be an animist to do that work. You don't have to be into ancestors to be an animist. But if you're not an animist, you don't believe in ancestral spirits. So there is something that animism underlies all those. But then from there, it's about what other directions the people want us to talk, discuss, and bring other people in, maybe. It's areas that we don't follow. But I think animism is the underlying principle for all of them.
We've got Samantha saying, yes, please, very interesting. Thank you, Samantha. We've got Susie again saying, yes, please, very interesting. And I've just missed one. We've got Louise who's saying geomancy and animism might be a good discussion.
It comes back to your point earlier, doesn't it, Chris? About the landscape that you grew up on. And yours, John, about the different fens and chalk.
And in the Celtic beliefs as to who they were related to with regard to and then we've got Samantha saying, do you think there are particular cultures, countries, or even people that are more engaged with animism?
I think
non-Europeans.
By saying the ones that haven't been, that the missionaries haven't reached, or the missionaries have been killed when they got there. I don't know.
There's a lot of indigenous animistic cultures still out there, but as John's just said, they tend to be in the areas of the world.
Interesting stuff. If you look at the sort of hoodoo voodoo stuff, that even though the Christianity reached there, it integrated with an animist belief system. So there might.
Japanese Shinto as well, really, is quite animistic, isn't it?
Obviously Iceland. Underbelly.
And then we've got Samantha, who's saying, as alluded to, we are all able to be animist if we are open to it. But it seems some are open and some are not. And I wondered on what basis that might be.
Ability to throw off the blinkers of the education system.
I think,
and to think outside it. And interestingly enough, I have to say thank you to an ex-Jesuit. I mean, I went to a Catholic school, and In the sixth form, we had an ex-Jesuit take on the religious education for the school. And partway through one lesson, he stopped and said, have any of you got any questions? We're like, no, this is really interesting stuff. And he said, what I'm teaching you is straightforward heresy, but you're not challenging it. We're, no, we quite like it.
Yeah.
And we went with it. And what he actually taught us in that last year at school was to actually throw off the blinkers that the school had put on us.
Yeah.
And to think outside that and to be prepared to look at other things. And that was an ex-Jesuit. So thank you to him, because he actually taught me to get rid of all the indoctrination that the school had put onto me over those previous 6-7 years, and to actually start thinking, exploring and looking for myself.
Yeah. I think that word that you've just used is the key to it, is indoctrination. I think that some people have been that indoctrinated that they're just not, it's almost like they've lost the ability to think for themselves and to question things.
I'd go back to John's comment earlier about fighting the spirit of a bacteria. You know, we've been injected with a doctrine and it's inside us, but we have to be able to fight that in doctrine, get it out and start looking for ourselves.
I think we shouldn't be too cruel, because I think a lot of people, it's easier to follow a structure and a belief system that society offers you than to challenge it or to question it. You know, I mean, I've experienced persecution in my younger years for being other than, you know, for daring to question or to ask explanation. And it's not an easy path sometimes, because you stand out, so you're subject to, you know, possible persecution through that. Question the status quo as such is not an easy path, but it's a worthwhile path. But for a lot of people, they will take the easy route and just go along with the status quo. And so I
think there's also that we are part of the indoctrination of the world we live in now. The sugar junkie world, if you like, is we are also taught to look for easy answers that the society as a whole provides for us. If you start challenging your spiritual beliefs that you've been indoctrinated into, and that all the messages in the public text continue to reinforce those beliefs, if you start to challenge them and question, you aren't taking an easy path. I mean, as you said, John, you'll be positive kids, but also you can go to your local priest and he'll give you a nice, easy answer. And I say he. You can go out to a piece of the landscape that calls to you, whether that's a river, a canal, a hill, a tree, whatever. Seeking an answer, and it's not going to come as quickly as easily, because you've got to put some work into it as well. And I think we're taught to find easy paths, and it's not an easy path. To throw off blinkers and to take the hood off your head and the blindfolds and the headphones off and start listening differently and seeing differently. So I think there's also that it's about being open and also accept that it's not going to give quick and easy solutions and answers. But having said that, when you're sat there by that river or stream or tree or rock or hill, not getting the answer you want, you may find, though, that your general well-being is improving, and that can be a payoff.
Definitely.
And I think it's something I want to add at this point, which, you know, is like one of the questions we haven't been asked is why animism? And I think I want to quote David Suzuki here on a post that comes up quite regularly on Facebook. The way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. If a mountain is a deity, not a pile of ore. If a forest is a sacred grove, not timbers. If other species are biological kin, not resources. Or if the planet is our mother, not an opportunity, then we will treat each other with greater respect. Thus is the challenge, to look at the world from a different perspective. And you know, we're facing environmental collapse, where us and other life forms may no longer be able to inhabit this planet, unless we can, you know. And animism is a way of embracing that again. Tribal culture tend not to eat the last animal, chop down the last tree. They know that they have to have a symbiosis with their landscape and with the other creatures that live there. And so, you know, they are able to survive. But we are living in a Western world which is based on consumerism, and that consumerism is turning other life forms into stuff. And we are consuming more than nature can reproduce. And
we've lost sight of the fact that if everything is surviving, if everything is doing more than surviving, if everything is thriving, then that means that we are also thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we have lost sight of that. Samantha said she very much agrees with what we've all said. It says, thank you for our answers. You're welcome, Samantha. And yes, we will look at doing this, not perhaps identical, but maybe as, who was it? Louise said about talking around geomancy, or as John has said, including the shamanic aspects in with it as well. Perhaps look at doing it again in a couple of months' time.
Yeah.
So that we're not pestering people every week saying, well, come and take part, come and ask questions on our live every week. Give people thinking time. And if there's anybody knows of that they would like us to perhaps approach and to be part of the panel of people hosting the question and answer, let us know, and I'm quite open to approaching other people as well. I think on StreamYard, on the free one, I can have up to 6 people in the panel. Right, so we've also got a thanks for this, feels like my tribe. I'm glad
welcome.
Yeah, very welcome. It's always good to find your tribe. That's what I was saying to John when I was having a discussion with John Sullivan-Blakeney, the one that's at the bottom of your screen, and suggesting that could we meet up for a coffee, because where I live in Tamworth, there just isn't anybody else. And finding somebody else that I can even talk about the concept of animism to, or any of the aspects of it, it's almost impossible. Even people that reckon that they follow this sort of concept, when it comes down to it, they don't. Not wanting to be nasty to anyone, but they just don't.
Sorry.
They don't get it why I'm not happy about them putting plastic grass down.
I'd just like to mention, someone who I think has really, he actually was in this country, certainly. I mean, there's various other people in America, but someone who's really moved animism forward in this country as to being, acceptable amongst academics now, and that's Professor Graham Harvey.
Yes.
And in his book, if anyone wants a book to read, it's quite academic, because Graham Harvey was the head of the Open University's religious studies, and he came out with this concept of what he called new animism, to re-look at animism.
Yes. Yeah.
As different to what Tyler had presented.
Yeah.
And has really got animism back onto the religious curriculum. So he's done some amazing work.
I wonder whether is Graham Harvey still in this realm with us?
Oh yes, yeah. As far as I know, yeah.
I wonder whether I should have the cheek of the devil and actually approach him and see whether he would be part of our discussion for a live event.
He may well have watched this on Facebook and express an interest.
But I'm trying in the Substack. I will put any links of information into the comments under the event when it goes to being able to rewatch as a recorded event. So I will put any relevant links that people might find interested in there afterwards. But I will also put a link into the Substack platform where I now publish all my articles too. So if anybody wants to subscribe to that, it's free. And I would like to attract some guest authors onto that as well. So it isn't just articles by me. And be able to open it up. So again, if anybody wants to write an article or knows anybody who would write an article, then I'm quite happy to guest author them on Substack, but I'll put the link to the Substack in the comments as well afterwards. So thank you everybody for coming and listening to us witter on and talk about how we see the answers to your questions. We've just had another comment in.
This is running and running now, isn't it?
Yeah. Unified field physics. Yeah, this is when it tells me it's time to perhaps call it a night. Is when
I'll let you know what unified field physics is. Yeah.
When I try to speak and the words all come out back to front, I know that's. So yeah, unified field physics. Yes, there's an awful lot of different areas of science now that are pointing to animism.
Bringing things together.
Yeah. So, right, okay, so we will say good night to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
And hopefully see you all again in a couple of months' time. And do tell anybody else that you know that might be interested in coming along and joining us. Okay.
Take care, everyone.
So I will click end broadcast. So good night, everyone.
Good night all.